White played e4, and instead of e5 response by black, black decided to play c5. This particular position is one of the move that starts the most played, the most studied, and most complex opening in all of chess. We call it the Sicilian defense. This particular move is used by a lot of players, grandmasters, both in the past and in this current period, by Bobby Fischer, Gary Kasparov, Magnus Carlsen, and virtually every elite players in history and today. Today, we learn why it is so powerful. When black normally plays e5 in response to white e4, the game is symmetrical. Both players have the same structure. White still has a small advantage because white moved first. But when black plays c5 in this situation instead, when black plays c5 in response to white e4, the c5 pawn fights for the d4 square. In this situation, this particular d4 square. Black is not trying to battle or contend with the pawn on e4 for the d4 square, but the c5 pawn is fighting over the d4 square in this particular situation without placing a pawn in the center. So black is not fighting for the center, is using the pawn from the c5 square to fight at the center. Black is saying, I'm not going to copy your position. I'm going to fight for the center, but I'm going to do it from the side. This creates an asymmetrical game, which is like an imbalanced game where both players have different plans and different advantages. This particular situation is what sometimes break a lot of players who believe that they are playing with people that wants to contend for the center. But when someone hits them with a move like c5, then they get moved or became imbalanced. White has more central space, although the e4 pawn is like very, very strong. It's controlling a lot of squares, and compared to the c5 pawn that is not, more involved in the center in this situation. Black has what we called a queenside majority. We are going to talk more about what we call majority and minority in our future videos. But black has what we call a queenside majority. After white plays the d4 and black captures, right? For example, after white play, excuse me, after white play this d4, right, and black captures the d4 in this situation, and black has more pawns on the queen side. So that is what the majority is talking about, right? So now this is the queen side, that is from the queen to the right hand side, and this is the king side, from the king side to the right hand side. So if black should capture this pawn, that means black has been able to eliminate this pawn. So white is left with 3 pawns at the queen side, while black has 4 pawns at the queen side. So that is the majority part that we are talking about. So this leads to like a very common dynamic in Sicilian games, right? So now we have white attacking from the king side, and then black is counter attacking from the queen side. So the game becomes a race, right? So who is going to create the fastest and the strongest attack, right? Um, so we have white pawn pointing to this side and then to the king side, and then excuse me, we have white pawn pointing to the king side, and then we have the black pawn pointing to the queen side. So this is why the Sicilian is so popular. Both sides have a genuine winning chances, right? So it is not a draw seeking opening, right? Unlike the e4 e5 opening. So it is a fighting opening. While black is telling black that bring it on. Black is telling white that bring it on, I'm ready to to fight over this. And at the highest level, this is exactly what players want. They want a fight. They don't want just a passive kind of game. They want a game that is going to be intriguing and worth the while. The most important line in the Sicilian is what we call the open Sicilian. So in the open Sicilian, so let's just go over the whole game again. So after white plays e4, right, and black responds with e5, unusual compared to the e5 here, and black responds with c5 instead, right? So after that, then um black plays knight f3, right? Black just continues with the development, trying to control the square in which black is now trying to control with their pawn with the knight. They can't do that with this particular pawn anymore, because when they play that, it's going to get captured, and why black is going to have the majority in the queen side. So white respond with knight f3, trying to control that square again, and then black respond by playing d6, protecting this particular pawn here, because this pawn is like the major um opening. So we call it the open Sicilian, right? So after d6, then white plays d4. So this is what we call the open Sicilian. After d6, white plays d4. White is now telling black that, okay, bring it on. I'm going to contest for the center, and if you get to capture, I have my knight here ready to capture back in this particular situation. So this is white's most ambitious response, right? It is challenging the center immediately, that, oh, I don't want to to take it easy on you. So then after this c5, maybe white black captures, c5 takes, and then knight takes back, and down white has recaptures the white has recaptured the center with the knight, placing it on a very powerful central square, right? You know that that square is very, very powerful, if one of the four most important squares. Now black has developed the with black develops by developing the knight to f6, trying to attack the center again. So this is just a situation where where black is saying, oh, I'm still going to challenge the center, and then you placing you in a very, very unpleasant position. And white respond with a developing move as well, knight to c3, trying to protect the e4 pawn in this situation. So if you look at this particular position now, look at this position. White has strong central control, right? The pawn on e4, the knight on d4, and then c3. So look at all of these. So these are very powerful central control. In fact, this knight is occupying the center itself. Then there is a pawn here occupying the center and also controlling the center. And then we have another knight on c3 as well, also controlling the center. So you can see now that white has a lot of central control. So black has the c5 pawn instead. Now, where now the c5 pawn has been traded and now has a, what we call a half open c5, right? So if you look at this c5 now, it's half open. So, and then it allows for black rook to easily come here and occupy this position. Like I always say, you should occupy your an open position with your rook, right? So, and that is what black has in compensation. So that means that the black rooks will be very, very active on c8, and this is the starting point of the open Sicilian. From here, there are many variations that you can play. We have the Nachdorf variation, we have the Dragon variation, we have the Scheveningen variation, and then we have the classical Sicilian variation. So all these different variations has very deep world theory, right? There are a lot of theories that a lot of strong chess masters know, and they have in their arsenal that they can use. So today we are going to look at three most important ones. So we are going to look at the Nachdorf, we are going to look at the Dragon, and then we are going to look at the Scheveningen. So I'm going to give the last one, the classical, as an home take for you to as a take home rather, for you to go back and then try to know these different variations. So I think we can dive right into it and then look at each of these variation one after the other. So after each of the moves we talked about, e4 by white, black respond with c5, unusual, then knight f3, then pawn to d6, trying to protect the other pawn on c5, then immediately attacking the center by white, pawn to d4. Please note that all of these positions are book move, they are theory. So if you want to learn them, you can play something different. If you play something different, it's going to give you a different game entirely. So if you want to respond to Sicilian defense as white, so as if you are playing white and your opponent use the Sicilian defense against you, right, this is what you want to play, right? And if you are black and you want to use the Sicilian defense, if any different variations, this is the right step to follow. Right after black captures on d4, knight takes d4, and then knight to f6, knight to c3, and then the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense a6. So this a6 here is what we call the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense. So it is named after an Argentine grandmaster, Miguel Nachdorf. It's Bobby Fischer called him like his favorite, called this opening his favorite defense, and Kasparov has been playing it throughout his entire career. A lot of Kasparov games were the Nachdorf variation of the Sicilian defense. You see that quiet move a6. It's doing a lot of, we call it the multi-purpose move, right? It's doing a lot of damages, a lot of things, right? One is that it stops white pieces from going to that b5, right? So look at this b5 square. It stops white pieces from going there entirely. Now black knight here is not able to come here. This other knight is not able to do the same thing. This bishop here is not also able to come here. You can see that this quiet move is doing a lot of things. Also, the move is preparing something powerful from the king, from the queen side. You know, we mentioned that why black always has an advantage at the queen side with the majority after capturing the pawn. You know, they now have 3 pawns now, and then there is what we call the half open file for black. It also prepares this move, this quiet move prepares white b7 pawn from pushing to b5 and is going to get protected. Now black can decide to push the pawn to b5 and that particular pawn is going to get protected. You can now see why that move is quiet. And another thing is that it gives the black's queen an access to c7 and then b6. So it gives the black queen an access to this particular square here, c7, b6 and all of that. So when you push this pawn forward like this and then you play this one, you can easily move here and then you know you plan a lot of attacks from there. In this particular position, right, so after a6 powerful quiet move by black, the best response by white is to play bishop to g5. Bishop to g5 is very powerful for white because one, if eventually this pawn is going to move forward, it's going to pin the knight to the queen, and then another powerful move if white doesn't want to play that is to play something like maybe bishop to e3, right? So bishop to e3 is also a very good move by white, and then find a way to push pawn to f3 and also push this pawn side forward and start a king side attack, trying to destroy this particular king side for black. So if in these different positions, like these are the different sharpest lines, right, in all of the chess theory that you can use, both if you want to use the Sicilian defense as white, the national variation, or you want to respond to it if you are playing white. So we are going to move on to the next variation, which is the dragon variation, right? So the dragon variation is a little bit different. So let's start from the beginning again and look at this Sicilian defense after e4, c5, and all of the moves that we have talked about. So rather after knight capture, knight out, defense, and the move for the Najdorf is a6. But instead of this a6 pawn, right? Instead of the a6 pawn for the dragon variation, what white is going to play is g6. White is going to play g6. black rather is going to play g6. Black is going to play g6 in response to I mean this particular move here is what we call the dragon variation g6. So the dragon variation, the g6 is doing a lot of things, right? Black prepares to fianchetto the bishop, right? So this is what we call fianchetto, basically bringing your bishop to either g7, b7, and b2 or g2. So these are the different squares you have. You can fianchetto your bishop, and you need to push these pawns forward in order to do that. So you push this pawn forward. So now black is ready to fianchetto the bishop in order to have a queenside attack. You know, black already has an advantage of queenside attack, but putting this bishop here is also trying to serve a long-term goal for black, right? So the bishop on g7 is called the dragon bishop, and that is why we call it the dragon variation. And it is going to be the black's most powerful piece in this particular variation because it eyes white queen side. You know, you can see this queen side, the arrow that I've drawn here, right? It eyes that white queen side and can cause a lot of devastating damage if that position becomes open eventually, right? That means if this knight eventually moves away, and it can, and then all of these pieces are not there, you can see that that is the direct path to white's rook, right? So it serves a long-term goal. And in this position now, white's most aggressive response is to use what we call the Yugoslav attack. Is to use what we call the Yugoslav attack. The Yugoslav attack is to play a move like f3. You know, we talked about this f3 when we were explaining some of the responses of white to the Najdorf variation, but you can also use this Yugoslav playing f3 and then bringing out the bishop to e3 and then bringing out the queen as well to d2 or e2 and castle, okay, or bring out this particular bishop and castle to the king side, right? So instead of castling to the queen side and allowing this bishop to be doing a lot of damage, you can castle to the queen side and to the king side rather. So that is the dragon variation. So importantly, rather than castling to the king side, Importantly, rather than castling to the king side, white should castle to the queen side. Castling to the queen side will make this pawn push available. This f3 and further queens and pawn storming would to make it possible for white. So rather than castling, so white is going to castle long in this situation. Although black has this very sharp and dangerous bishop fianchettoed on g7. So the dragon variation, it leads to some of the sharpest and most tactical games in chess. Right? Both sides castle on the opposite side and they are going to launch their attack as fast as possible. So one is launching an attack from that side where the opponent is castled and the other side is doing the same thing. This particular opening is not for the faint-hearted. So if you know you are ready as black to play a very challenging game, you want to use the you want to use the Sicilian defense. And in this particular variation, the dragon variation, try as much as possible not to use your dark square bishop. Do not lose your dark square bishop because it is very, very important in launching an attack where where your opponent, where white is castled, right? They are castled to the queen side, so you don't want to lose your bishop, the dark square bishop. You don't want to lose it, right? So let's talk about the third one, the Scheveningen variation. The Scheveningen variation, right? So the Scheveningen variation is the third variation under the Sicilian defense. So after all of the all of the processes that we talk about for the Sicilian defense, e4, c5, and all of that, right? After knight captured, so the next move, instead of playing pawn to a6 or playing f3 pawn and then bringing out the bishop and castling long for the dragon variation or the Najdorf variation, for the Scheveningen variation, you play e6. Yes, you play e6. E6 is also a very powerful but also subtle variation, right? So what black is doing is that black builds a solid pawn structure, right? We are also going to be talking about pawn structure later in our videos. You see those pawns on d6 and then e6. You see these two pawns, they are very, very solid, and then it's creating what we call like a defensive wall. So this is the most solid of the main Sicilian variations, right? So we talk about the what we call the dragon variation, which is very sharp, and then we talked about the Nash dove variation, which is very straightforward and shows what black is intending to do, which is attack from the queen side. But you see this Scheveningen variation is a very strong variation, is a very solid one in terms of defense, right? It is all about control, it is all about strategic play. Black develops all their pieces behind the pawn, right? You see these two pawns on d6 and those two pawns on d6 and then and e6, right? They are a very defensive wall for other pieces instead of the queen, instead of the king now, rather. So black castled safely and then they begin this queenside counterplay, right? So it is not as sharp as the dragon variation or the Nash dog variation, but it is very solid in terms of when it comes to defense, right? So you just bring out your bishop here, then you castle short, and then you start launching your attack. You see these two pawns, they are very powerful in the Scheveningen variation, right? So after the e4 and then e5 from the e4 and then e5 from the beginning, we have what we call a symmetrical opening, right? But this c5 opening by the Sicilian defense makes the game asymmetrical. So white is fighting for the center and attacks the king side. Black is is fighting from the side and attacking the queen side space, which is like a counter attack. So these three main variation that we've talked about, the Nashdorf, where you respond in the fifth move with a6, which is like the most popular opening that we've talked about. You respond with a6 after the fifth move in this situation, and then we have the dragon where you respond with g6 instead of a6. You respond with g6 in this situation, and then the Nashdorf is very sharp and tactical. And lastly, we have the e6 response, right? We have the e6 response, which is the Scheveningen variation. It is very solid and it is strategic. If you want to play a fighting game, right, you want to use the e4 and rest, and your opponent, and you want to play a fighting game as black, and then you want to play as black and your opponent plays e4 as white, you want to use the Sicilian defense. It is your best weapon. So tomorrow is puzzle day, and then we are going to be looking at checkmating in two moves. I'm just going to be posting the puzzle tomorrow. So afterwards, I'm going to show us the explanation of the puzzle. So I want you to give your comments about the puzzle, try to solve it, and then give what it try to solve and give a response. Subscribe, and I will see you then. Bye for now.